Imagine a country that has been officially dying economically for 30 years straight. Interest rates at zero, debt through the roof, population shrinking, deflation for decades. Every single textbook says this country should have collapsed by now. But it didn't. It's still standing, still functioning, still one of the richest nations on Earth. That country is Japan, and the fact that it's still alive is somehow the scariest part of the whole story. To understand why Japan confuses every economist alive, we need to go back to the 1980s, because back then, Japan wasn't dying at all. Japan was on fire, in a good way. After World War II, Japan rebuilt itself from almost nothing, and by the 1980s, it had become an absolute economic machine. Japanese cars were dominating American roads. Japanese electronics were in every living room on the planet. Companies like Sony, Toyota, and Nintendo were household names everywhere. And the money was flowing. Japanese land prices were so high that economists calculated the grounds of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo were worth more than the entire state of California. That is not a joke. That actually happened. Tokyo real estate was selling for prices that made no logical sense. The stock market was hitting record high after record high. Everyone in Japan felt rich. Banks were lending money like it would never stop. Companies were borrowing like tomorrow didn't exist. This period had a name. It was called the bubble economy. And like every bubble in history, it had one inevitable ending. It popped. In 1989 and 1990, the Japanese stock market collapsed. Land prices began a free fall that would last for 15 years. Banks that had lent enormous sums of money suddenly realized their borrowers couldn't pay them back. The wealth that had felt so real just months before evaporated almost overnight. And that is where Japan's 30-year mystery begins. Here is what every economics textbook tells you should happen after a financial crash. Asset prices fall, banks tighten up, bad companies go bankrupt, unemployment spikes painfully, people suffer for a few years. Then the economy cleans itself out, restarts, and grows again. It's brutal, but it works. America did it in the 1930s. South Korea did it after 1997. Even Iceland did it after 2008. The pattern is consistent. Crash, pain, recovery. Japan did something completely different. Japan refused to let things fail. When banks were drowning in bad loans they couldn't collect, the government quietly helped keep them alive instead of letting them close. When companies were technically bankrupt and should have shut down, banks kept lending them just enough money to stay open. These companies even got a nickname. Economists called them zombie companies, businesses that were technically dead but kept walking around anyway because someone kept the money flowing. And the Bank of Japan, which is Japan's version of the Federal Reserve, did something that had never really been tried before. They dropped interest rates to almost zero. The idea was simple. If borrowing money is basically free, people will borrow, spend, invest, and the economy will get moving again. It sounds logical. It did not work. Not the way they hoped. Here's the thing about cheap money. If people are scared and pessimistic about the future, they do not borrow, even when it is free. Japanese consumers had just watched their savings and their land values and their stock portfolios evaporate. They were not in the mood to take on new debt. They started doing the opposite. They started saving everything, spending as little as possible, waiting for prices to fall even further before buying anything. And here is where Japan fell into one of the most dangerous economic traps ever identified. It's called a deflationary spiral. When people expect prices to keep falling, they wait to spend. When they wait to spend, companies make less money. When companies make less money, they cut wages and stop hiring. When wages fall and jobs disappear, people get even more scared and save even more, which makes prices fall further, which makes people wait longer. Around and around it goes with no obvious exit. Economists had studied deflation mostly through the Great Depression. They knew it was bad. What they did not fully understand was how a country could get completely stuck inside it for not 1 year, not 5 years, but for 3 entire decades. By the 2010s, the world was starting to pay very close attention to Japan because the 2008 global financial crisis had pushed interest rates towards zero in America and Europe too. Suddenly, everyone was asking the same terrifying question: are we turning into Japan? The phrase Japanification entered the vocabulary of every central bank on Earth. It basically meant the nightmare scenario: low growth forever, inflation that refuses to appear, interest rates stuck at zero with nowhere left to go, an economy technically functioning but never really thriving. In 2013, Japan decided to try something dramatic. A new prime minister named Shinzo Abe launched an enormous economic experiment nicknamed Abenomics. The plan had 3 parts that his team called 3 arrows. The first arrow was printing massive amounts of money and flooding the economy with it. The second arrow was huge government spending on infrastructure and public works. The third arrow was structural reforms to make Japanese businesses more competitive and open the economy to more women and foreign workers. The world watched closely. Some things worked. The stock market rose significantly. The yen weakened, which helped Japanese exports. Unemployment actually fell to historic lows. But the core problem, the one that had haunted Japan since 1990, the deep psychological reluctance of consumers and businesses to spend and invest and believe in tomorrow, that problem proved stubbornly resistant to all 3 arrows. And then something genuinely strange happens. After decades of falling prices, Japan finally started seeing inflation again. But it did not come from success. It came from global supply chain shocks and the energy crisis following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Prices rose, but wages did not rise fast enough to match them. So, Japanese workers found themselves poorer in real terms, even as the government celebrated the return of inflation it had chased for 30 years. It was the cruelest possible version of getting what you wished for. So what is the actual lesson of Japan? Is it a failure? Not exactly. Japan still has the 3rd largest economy in the world. Its streets are safe, its trains run on time, its people live longer than almost anyone on Earth. The social fabric never tore the way it does in a classic economic collapse. There was no revolution, no hyperinflation wiping out life savings overnight, no breadlines. By many measures of actual human quality of life, Japan held together remarkably well during its lost decades. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Japan showed the world that an economy can get trapped in a slow gray fog for decades without ever fully crashing and without ever fully recovering. No dramatic collapse, no clean restart, just a long, quiet, grinding stagnation where potential is permanently left on the table and an entire generation grows up with lower expectations than their parents had. Every major economy in the world, including the United States, including Europe, is now running some version of the same experiment Japan ran first. Zero interest rates, massive government debt, aging populations. The economists and central bankers managing those economies study Japan not as a curiosity, but as a warning. A detailed 30-year-long real-world case study in what happens when the tools we trust to fix economies stop working the way the textbooks say they should. Japan did not break the rules of economics. Japan revealed that the rules have limits nobody fully understood. And that's the most terrifying economic lesson of the last 50 years. If you want to understand where the global economy might be heading next, you need to understand what already happened in Japan. This channel exists to make that kind of thing actually make sense. Subscribe so you never miss the next one, because the next video is about the country that might be walking straight into the same trap right now. You're going to want to know which one it is.